Hey guys, this is Annie Noodle, and it's a little bit early, so this might look a little bit grainy, and I apologize for that. But today we're going to go over how I made this little guy, and then how I used this little guy to make this thing, and how I used this weird thing to make other stuff. So let's get going. So, first of all, we start off with a sketch, which I clearly already have here. And you see me comparing the size of my tinfoil ball that I will use as an armature to the size of the sketch, because I was thinking it's a good size. And if you're also thinking, which I clearly was not at the time, um, if I'm making the armature the size of the head, clearly the finished piece is going to be a lot bigger. And that's fine. Like, I made a lot of mistakes when I was making this sculpture and the subsequent mold and the cast from the mold. I made a lot of mistakes in this whole process, and they're only exciting to me because I got to learn so much and I had so much fun doing all of this. And honestly, I really liked how my finished pieces turned out, so this is gonna be a cat. It looks like a rabbit for like like seriously, when I was sculpting it, the first 2 hours I was like, this still looks like a rabbit. That's fine. It looks like a cat eventually. So here what you're seeing me doing is comparing the sculpt that I'm working on to the sketches that I have, so that I'm like, okay, the eye needs to be set back this far when I'm looking at the profile. And it's really interesting to have to think three-dimensionally when you're really used to just thinking two-dimensionally. I mean, you know what I mean. Like, when you're painting, you're still trying to think of what an object looks like in 3 dimensions so that you can get good lighting and good form and good value, but it is a lot different to actually be sculpting something. And in some ways, it's easier. Um, in some ways, it is not easier. So I would say that I had probably 15 hours of footage all told. So I obviously cut this way, way down to get this under half an hour even. And so I cut out a lot of my process. And so if you guys have any questions about what I did, just drop me a note in the comments and I will let you know how I worked my way through it. A lot of this process I am just figuring out as I go because there doesn't seem to be a lot of information on making molds this way. Oh, and by the way, I'm a patron of Tina Yu, and she does something somewhat like this where she sculpts a face out of, I think, Fimo and makes a mold from it and then uses Apoxie Sculpt to make the casts. And she is a professional sculptor, so her sculpts and her molds are really gorgeous. Um, but I just wanted to, give her the shout out because I got this idea from watching her, and from watching other people who make casts out of resin, who also are very encouraging. Like, the people that I have seen doing mold making and casting have been like, it seems like a scary process, but just do it. Like, you're gonna mess up. Your first things are not gonna be that great, but you have to get into the process. Otherwise, you're never gonna start. So, stop being afraid and just do stuff. And that kind of encouragement is super helpful. So if you're thinking about doing casts and mold making, I'll give you the same advice. It's complicated, but it's not that complicated. So, and honestly, I think if you give it a try, you will be able to find a way to get a finished result that might not be what you had in mind, but will still be really fun, which is what I ended up here. Like, my finished pieces are like definitely not as polished looking as I would have liked them to be, but hey, I'm just learning. So, Annie, give yourself a break. Just That's one of my New Year's resolutions, is be nicer to myself. So, yeah, I think I did great. So what I am doing here is making the ears out of armature because the ears are big enough and they stand away from the main form enough that they're going to want support. Otherwise, they'll probably crack. Which, I mean, technically, I don't know that it would matter in the long run. Look at how cute he is. I don't know that it would matter in the long run because I'm really just using him to make a mold. And I'm not sure if I'm going to do anything with the finished sculpture of his head or not. I don't know. But so I started putting clay on his ear and realized that I needed to put a second brace in the middle because I don't have, really, I wish I had wire mesh. And if I have another sculpture project this year that comes up that requires wire mesh, I will buy some. My personal terms of my no buy don't preclude me buying things that I actually need for a project that I am doing. Oh, and here's the mold putty that I'm using to make that weird yellow blob. So it's a two-part mold putty, and you just mix equal parts together, and then you smoosh them onto the form that you're trying to copy. And I think a lot of people use them for much smaller things, but it actually worked okay for this. So I really wanted to be careful to get that putty into all the cracks and crevices, which is what I am doing here. I am really smushing it into the nostrils and the little, like, the eyes and the mouth. Like, I want to make sure they get all of those in the mold because otherwise the cast from the mold won't have those details, and clearly I want them. And the only problem that I ran into with the mold putty, and you will see this, is one, you can see that I put that other blob on top of the first blob and it left a crack. Like, you can see the seam where those two things meet. And clear, if I was using a pourable mold silicone, there we go. If I was using a pourable silicone to make my mold, that wouldn't have been a problem. But the other problem I ran into with this is I didn't wait long enough for it to cure, which is why you see me doing a lot of tapping. When I first pulled this cat head out of there, you can see all those little like crusty bits on the nose. The mold hadn't finished curing, so yeah, it kind of made a mess. So, and then I ran into this problem where I haven't worked enough with Apoxie Sculpt to remember that I needed to let it sit for a while. Otherwise, it's super sticky and it's really hard to work with. So I'm like seriously struggling here. Like, I don't think I washed this mold enough because there's a little bit of kind of greasy film on it, and I don't think I washed it well enough to get all of that off. So like the Apoxie Sculpt isn't wanting to stay in the mold, and then I also didn't let the Apoxie Sculpt sit long enough to not be sticky. So like I said, big learning process. My first cast was really not so great, but I mean, I still think I turned it into something fun. So I don't feel like I wasted my time. And all right, so here's where we're pulling it out. And yeah, it's clearly very, especially like on that cheek, it got pretty bad. And the nose, I was expecting that. But I ran into the same problem with the Apoxie Sculpt that I ran into with the mold putty, is that when I was putting it in, I wasn't being careful enough to eliminate the seams in between the various pieces of the Apoxie Sculpt. And if you're wondering why I didn't use resin, Apoxie Sculpt to me is more durable and easier to work with, and it doesn't require me to wear a respirator. I do have plans. I have resin. I plan on using it this year to make casts, so, but I was really excited to get these giant buckets of Apoxie Sculpt. When I run out of these, I might try Magic Sculpt, which is like another part or another type of two-part air dry resin putty like this. So that might be fun to try. So you will see in the background there, I found this butterfly plaque. And I collect these wooden panels. Collect, but like I buy these when I see them at like thrift stores and stuff because I like to paint on them. But this one, the edges were very like wobbly. So like I was like, well, I'm never gonna paint on that, so I will use it for this sculpture instead. And so here I am putting down Apoxie Sculpt as like a base so that I can do things over it. And one of the nice things about Apoxie Sculpt is that you can smooth it with water, which I really like. And you can't do that with polymer clays like Sculpey. With those, you have to use rubbing alcohol, which is fine. I mean, it's not like that's toxic, but it is kind of smelly. So I definitely prefer using the water, but you also can't get the same level of detail with Apoxie Sculpt that you can get with Sculpey. It's definitely a different kind of thing. So after I smooth the base, you can see that I've been just using some various stamps that I have to make a kind of chaotic tile stamped background is what I'm going for. And yeah, so I have this cool silicone one that I actually bought off of Etsy, I think, a while ago. And I am using it on the face of the cat too. And if you're wondering how that's possible, because my Apoxie Sculpt dried in that mold, I did put another layer of fresh Apoxie Sculpt on the outside, partially to smooth out some of the cracks and partially so that I could put stamps on it like that so that it would blend in with the background more. Because I kind of want it to be cohesive. Like, I don't want the cat to look like it's a living cat. I want it to look like it's made of weird tile like the rest of this is. So that is the plan that I am going with. Just like as a side note, in case anybody is wondering why this video took me so very, very long to get out, I was working on this project for a couple weeks, but this video also took me like an entire day to edit. It was intense. Yeah. Oh, and here's the second cast. The second cast. And you can see how much better it turned out. It's still not perfect, but it's not going to be perfect because the mold is kind of messed up. And here's all three of them together. Yay! Aren't they cool? Anyways, so. So then I'm making ropes, little viney things, and that is also out of Apoxie Sculpt. And I believe this is when Tiny decides to come visit because she got really interested in all of the little vines I was making and really wanted to play with the clay noodles, and that's not great. I really don't want her to have Apoxie Sculpt permanently stuck in her fur. But look at how cute she is. Oh my goodness, that cat. I swear I have two other cats and I love them both too. But she's ridiculous and kind of, yeah, all up in my face. So this is the second cast now, and I wish I would have filled out the back more with tin foil for the armature because it got really heavy. Yeah, and there is more sculpting on that later, I promise, although not a lot because yeah, there were a lot of hours of footage that I had to cut out of this. So this is dried now, and I am just putting a coat of golden gesso on it so that I feel like the paint will stick better to that. I don't think you have to, but it made me feel better, and so I did it. The only thing I don't like as far as this piece goes is I feel like I left the leaves a little too chunky. I wish I would have made them a little bit thinner. So now we're sculpting on the second cast piece, and two things here. Like you can see in the background, that's the color box card that I decided to use to paint my weird butterfly cat shrine thing. Yeah, just in case you're wondering. I think it's number 97. And the other thing is that I know this isn't necessarily in order for you guys, but this is the order that I did all of this in. And I thought that if I tried to cut this up to be like, here's all of the footage of the cat butterfly thing, and then here's all the footage of this like cat ornament that I made. I thought I would get like I feel like the continuity would be messed up because I wasn't really trying for that. So I went with this instead. So for this cat head that is very furry, I just rolled out these kind of fat noodles of clay and stuck them on there, and then went through several layers of smoothing, especially for the fur lumps that are by the face. I wanted those to be more carefully blended in. So I did like a smoothing with the metal tool, and then a smoothing with this silicone tool, and then some smoothing with my fingers. And then after all that smoothing, I went back in and put more fresh clay on top of it to put in fur texture. And I was like, oh, I probably didn't need to spend so much time smoothing that, huh? But I didn't want it to be lumpy, like you don't want lumpy. So this is where he's sitting so far. And he took approximately 8 billion little hair lumps to be completed. And he's really funny, because he's meant to be hung up, so I wanted little hair lumps underneath his face too. So he kind of, when he sits on a table, he looks a little bit like his hair lumps are feet, and he's just gonna walk away. It's great. So here you can see how I put in the hair texture that's more flat. I put in a lump, and then I used a metal tool to make really chunky shapes. And then I went in again with the corner of a tool to make more fine hairlines, and that's kind of what I did for all of his forehead and his cheeks, where there weren't like the big fat noodle hair things everywhere, so that it would kind of blend in. And then there's some places that he just didn't get hair texture, obviously, like his eyelids and such. So no weird eyelid hairs for this guy. So sometimes I listen to what I say in my voiceovers later, and I'm like, Annie, what are you even saying? But that's fine, that's whatever. We're just gonna continue on. Also, you might notice that my glasses are sitting on my desk. Yeah, that's because I have old lady eyes now. I really need to get back into the eye doctor. Last time I went, she was basically like, you need bifocals. And I was like, fine, I want to get transition lenses anyway and just lean into being an old lady so that I don't have to worry about having separate sunglasses. So for those of you who don't have insurance that covers eye stuff, they aren't going to give you new glasses every time you need them. I think my insurance pays for a pair of glasses every 2 years. So I will be going to get new glasses now that it's January. I just need to remember to make an appointment. And then I'll have bifocals. So that'll be interesting. So we've gotten to the painting portion, and I really wanted to have, there's certain colors that have a spice market vibe to them, and I really wanted that for this background. But I wanted a lot of white too, so you will see me basically paint this whole thing in these spicy colors and then go back over it with white a couple times, actually. Yeah, it was really hard for me to figure out exactly what I wanted. I just kept putting on paint until it got to some place that I was happy. It was a strange process for me. It's not how I usually approach things. I usually have more of a clear plan in mind. So all of these first layers I am putting on in Turner Acrylic Gouache, and basically, there's an orange that I mix with a burnt sienna. This is something that I do a lot to just tone down colors when I don't want them to be super vibrant. You mix them with a burnt sienna or a raw umber to just kind of, bring them down a little bit so they're not so garish. And then yellow ochre is just yellow ochre. It does what it wants. It's ochre-y on its own. So, and I am, like I said, painting the cat's face so that it also looks like it's all part of one structure, and so it's not gonna stand out. I want it all to blend together like it's all made of tile. Except for the vines, which are going to be green eventually when I get there. And I know that you can clearly see that this is not supposed to be like a grid pattern, but I wanted to just like emphasize that I was really going for like kind of a hodgepodge mix of patterns. So I wanted to paint so that really came out too. Just in case you're looking at it and going, Annie, that's a hot mess. And it is. It is a hot mess, but it gets better. I promise. So you can see that I went over it with white. And the problem with the gouache, I was using the acrylic gouache, the problem with that is that it's matte. And I realized that I kind of wanted to have a little bit of a shine. So I actually broke out some of my just regular old acrylic paints to just give it not like a, super shiny, just a little bit of a luster. And then I'd dab it off. Like I was just doing the same thing that I did with any wash, really. So just put on the paint and then take it off again. And it helped. Like it's just a little bit of luster, and that's all I wanted. Because, I mean, in my mind, this is like kind of a little shrine that's been sitting in the woods for years and forgotten, and if you just stumble upon it, it's not going to be super shiny. It's going to be really worn and cracked and mossy, and that's what I was going for. So yeah, but I wanted to have that little bit of luster underneath everything else to just kind of, in my mind, it sells it. Even if nobody can tell but me, I am happy that it's there. So, okay. And so now we are starting to put washes in of green. So, giving it some mossy vibes to go with its happy vines. And I'm not gonna lie, I really loved how this turned out. Like this part in specifically, like I love how the cat's face looked with just even the green washes on it. It gets cooler, but like I was really happy like putting that wash on the eye, and it was like, yes, I look mossy now. And I was like, oh, that's so great. So yeah, and then I just kind of got more intense with my mossy look, like little streaks coming down where I think that might happen, right? Like where water would collect and then pool down and make little rivulets and give it that kind of streaky look, which was very, very fun to paint, I'm not gonna lie. And then I would go back in and kind of damp it back out, tap it a little bit to like make it less, what's the word I'm looking for? More fuzzy, less intense. All right, next step is we're gonna apply glue and then attach various types of moss and flocking and I don't know, maybe some grass or whatever. So I've been collecting these. Like hobby builders use them for like terrain elements. So I am just putting on some moss, which I think that might actually be moss. Sometimes it's hard to tell the difference between fake things and real things. So yeah, I'm just smushing stuff on there until I feel like it looks nice. And sometimes I'm smushing stuff on and then I'm rubbing half of it back off again because it starts to look like the cat started to look like it was wearing like a toupee for a while there. And I was like, well, that's not the look we're going for. But I'm just trying to put moss in places that I think it would actually gather if this was out in the elements. So the crevices in the eye, the crevices in the ear, on top of the head. I decided not to put any on top of the sculpture itself, even though I had the vines wrap around the edge. And eventually I do paint the edges too. But I didn't want flocking or any other moss things out there, just to, I don't know, keep the edges a little cleaner. And because even though I do go in and I coat this with like an adhesive to make sure it doesn't come off any more than I want it to, I I don't want them on the edge where they might rub off more easily, so I'll keep them a little protected. And this is the finished thing. Like, this is it. I am super happy with how this turned out. It is definitely not at all what I had in mind when I started this, but I would love to know what you guys think of my interesting little cat shrine, my fairy cat shrine. It is already hanging on the wall, which you will see at the end of the video. And then I believe I have some footage coming up of my other finished cat ornament. But I was really happy about this, so you got a lot of footage of this. Here's the cat ornament and how he looks now that he's got all of his little hair noodles in place. And I would love to know what you think of him. He has clearly not been painted yet. And if you have thoughts about how he should be painted, I would love to hear them, because I have some interesting ideas, but I'm not sure which way I'm gonna go yet. And then because he is attached to a wire, I had a little bit too much fun just letting him spin and having him zoom around like he's a little meteorite. You guys, I was laughing so hard the whole time I was filming this. I am not even kidding. It was so fun. Here's where the kitty ended up at the end. Guys, have a great week. I would love it if you subscribed and liked this so that I could grow my channel. And I'd love it if you left a comment. And I will see you later. Bye-bye.